I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, it's an issue that hits you emotionally and financially. What do you do with your aging parent? As people live longer and longer nowadays, they seem to need more care. And some of the caregivers are seniors themselves. So it is a double whammy. It's a very, very difficult situation indeed. Our next guest is an expert in the subject of elder law. Her name is Mary Mashburn, and she has written a wonderful book that you have to have if you're dealing with this issue. It is called Aging in Place: Navigating the Maze of Long-Term Care. Mary, thank you so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
Thank you, Logan. I'm glad to be here.
Pleasure to have you. It really is a maze. My wife was trying to get care for her father before he died a few years back, and she calls up a place for mom, like we hear advertised on TV, and she just gets bombarded by sales calls. You know, it's
Yeah,
such
I
a
do know.
difficult time, and people are throwing all sorts of things at you, and it can be so expensive. So tell me a little bit about why you wrote the book.
I wrote the book for people like your wife
Mm.
because they have all this information thrown at them. They have all these sales calls, as you said, and some of them are by very well-intentioned people. But you need to have an understanding of the basics in order to proceed intelligently to give your loved one the best care possible in these difficult times.
And that's what's great about your book. It's a practical how-to guide, how to take care of mom and dad or aunt and uncle or grandma and grandpa in their elder years when they can no longer stay in their homes. And that's the tough part too. This is an emotional thing. The parent doesn't want to leave their home often.
Right. And many times they don't have to. If you are able to plan effectively and you have access to good care within the home, many people are able to stay in their homes much longer, if not until the end of their lives. If you utilize things like palliative care and hospice and good staffing, you can keep people in their homes a long time. It's harder to do if you're not in the same place geographically as your loved one, but it's not even impossible then, with the help of geriatric care managers and other professionals. You can get a lot done and not be right there.
And
Obviously,
what about
you
easing
have
the financial burden?
that's really tough. That's really tough. Um, you have to have access to the funds, number one. So a financial power of attorney is critical. It's more critical, in my opinion, than a will. A financial power of attorney and a healthcare power of attorney are just critical in order for someone to help a loved one have the kind of life that they would like to have, because that way you got access to the money to spend for their benefit, and you're able to interface with healthcare professionals to talk about what they really need in the way of healthcare. And if you have those two components, you've got a lot going on in your favor. There's long-term care insurance can help pay for at-home care. And let's say your parents have some money, but not a whole lot. There are other state-funded programs in Ohio. They call it the PASSAR program. The philosophy behind PASSAR is, let's say people are on Medicaid because they qualify, but it's cheaper for the state if you have an involved family member to let them utilize things like adult daycare and in-home care. The state actually spends less by utilizing things like that than by putting the poor person in a nursing home.
And
So
it's fortunate the states kind of have gotten wise to this. They realize that it's more expensive to put mom or dad into a nursing home than it is to perhaps even compensate the caregiver who might be a family member.
exactly. And oftentimes the caregiver is a family member, which is great. Not everybody has the luxury or the foresight to get long-term care insurance in time, because as you know, I think you have to qualify medically for long-term care insurance. Remember in the old days with health insurance, how you couldn't have a pre-existing condition? A really good friend of mine suffers from Parkinson's disease and has suffered from it for a long time. And her husband was a retired state of Ohio employee, and he had access to long-term care insurance, which he got for himself. But Beatrice couldn't qualify. So now he's 80 and she's 82. They're hanging on. His health isn't what it could be, but I was able to work with friends of mine. They did save some money. So I was able to work with friends of mine to get them some private help. They're not in their house anymore. They're in a senior apartment, but that's okay. And they have a core number of caregivers come in for a certain number of hours a day. She needs it all night because he can't manage her overnight. In fact, she just fell the other day. And then he just fell, I understand. And that's bad news. But they were able to get the caregivers over there in time to help. And they stayed out of the hospital. So that's, there's a lot of good things that can happen if you got the right care, in my opinion.
Your home is often your economic engine. It also can be your economic engine when you're facing situations like this. It's important that you sometimes have to, I guess, sign over your house to an assisted living center or something.
That ship has sailed.
Really?
There's a 5-year look back period. And there are certain ways that you can sign it to your children. It's a little dicey, but it can work. For example, I'll talk about my friend Florence, who I mentioned in the book. Her son and daughter-in-law took care of her in their home for 2 years, more than 2 years. And then they just couldn't physically do it anymore. And she did end up in a nursing home. But because they took care of her in their home and they got to proper documentation from her doctor saying, yeah, without them taking care of her, she would be in a nursing home. They were able to she had already signed the house over to them in anticipation of this, which was good. And so they were able to keep the house, the family house that had been in their family since 1949. So that Joe and his brother still own that house still. And I have another family member living in there now. So
and part of the process, part of the process might be, though, exhausting your resources to the point where you qualify for Medicaid, right?
Yes, and that's called the Medicaid spend down. Many people think, oh, well, Medicare is going to pay for my stay in the nursing home. And it's possible that it will pay for part of it. But once you are dropped from coverage, you better either get out or start paying privately. And that's tough. And of course, if it's a single person, the rules are kind of ingrained. You have to spend down to $2,000, and then every month all of your income, save about $50, $90 if you're a veteran, has to go for your care, and you're able to keep that $2,000. And you have
amazing.
And
let's go through this step by step.
Sure.
I come to you. I've got a parent who's 90 years old. Can no longer stay in the home because she's got dementia.
Whatever reason, yeah.
What's your best advice? What do I do? Where do I start?
Well, first of all, you got to make sure if your documents are in place. Number one, do you have a healthcare power of attorney and a financial power of attorney? If you don't have those, maybe that person can sign them now if that person is still competent. If they're not, then you have to go with the court, which means in Ohio, it's called guardianship. In other states, it might be called conservatorship. And someone, it could be you, it could be an attorney, or a public guardian, would file for guardianship. And that's a very demeaning process. It involves court hearings, bond, everything is disclosed for the person's protection, but still it's no fun. And
that's where planning
around it, but you got to have your documents in place first. That's the whole thing.
Gotcha.
And if you have your documents in place, then you decide what level of care is appropriate. There, everything from a residential nursing home with full care down to maybe senior apartments with help. There's all kinds of options. It doesn't mean you have to go to, people always talk about nursing homes because nobody wants to go there. But there are options that are less, that you still have to pay for. You still have to pay for all of them. Assisted living can often be a good alternative. They do not provide the level of care that a nursing home does, but they're nicer usually. And you can supplement your assisted living care by using like agencies to come in for like a few hours a week to help. The way assisted livings work, they say, okay, here you are, here's our base rate. And then if you need this care, it's more, it's this much more, right? This care is this, and it's like a cafeteria style.
Yeah.
But then when you run out of money, in many cases, bye-bye. And then you have to go to someplace that approves Medicaid. And I understand where the assisted livings are coming from, because in many states, including Ohio, the return they get from the state is not good. Right. They have to be able to stay in business somehow.
Yeah. It's very tough. Like I said, we went through this with my father-in-law. My mother-in-law, we tried to get her into one, but she has dementia. So $10,000 a month quickly turned into $20,000 a month to live at a memory care facility. And $20,000 a month, many Americans, most Americans, I dare say, don't have it.
And that's when Medicaid can come in. So we talked about the $2,000 for an individual who's not married. But if you're married, there's what's called a prohibition against spousal impoverishment. Doesn't that sound encouraging? What they call a community spouse, which is someone who's not in the nursing home, can keep certain assets. There is it's very complicated, and I certainly recommend that if your loved one is married and they go into a nursing home, that they see an attorney forthwith, someone who specializes in elder law, because there's all kinds of things you can do. There's allowable expenses that you can pay for. You can pay for a car. You can pay for both funerals. You can, if the people are in debt, you can pay off their debt, all kinds of stuff. And the house is exempt. The widow can stay, the community spouse can stay in the house, but they have to make sure that they've got enough money to pay the upkeep and things on the house. Let's say that the community spouse has her own issues. I'm going to say her because usually it's a woman,
right?
Has her own issues with mobility or whatever. You can spend allowable expenses on fixing up the house so she can stay there longer, which is kind of neat. But you don't have much time to figure it out. That's the problem.
Right. Unless you are smart and plan when they're in their late 60s or 70s, opposed to planning when there's an urgent crisis right now and dad's got to go or mom's got to go.
You need to lower that age down a little bit.
Really? Okay.
55 to 65 is a good time to, if you're looking at long-term care insurance, that's probably optimal. The other thing is that you can do is there's a new program that you can buy, and I'm only learning a little bit about it. Apparently it's like an organization, and I apologize, I don't have all the details on it, but if anyone wants to let me know, I can email you the information. And you say, okay, I want to have $100,000 worth of care over this person's lifetime. And unlike long-term care insurance, the price doesn't go up. You buy units, and every month you just buy the units, and if you don't use it for a while, then the price goes down. But once you start using it, then it goes back up again. But it's compared to long-term care insurance, especially for somebody older, it's a good idea. And if you can't qualify medically for long-term care insurance, you can sometimes qualify medically for this, and that's really good. And then they have also annuities and life insurance products that have a long-term care provision in them. Sorry, I'm talking too much.
Yeah. So you've got some resources there. It just seems like it's such a difficult maze, like you said, to navigate. It's almost crazy, but I guess so is the healthcare system when somebody gets very sick.
It is. And there's so many options. There's a lot of options, which are good.
Right.
But you don't have much time to explore the options. That's the bad thing. Because the hospitals, when they're in the hospital, they want them out yesterday. Right. When they're in the nursing home and they no longer qualify for skilled care, they want either you stay there and pay big bucks or you're out. And that's really tough. I wrote in my book about a couple who the husband was in the nursing home, and actually my husband John was his guardian for a while, and his they needed to be separated. He was having some real behavior issues along with his aging issues. His wife just could not manage him, even though he had cancer.
Mm.
And so they had him in the nursing home. Of course, they're married, right? So we thought maybe we could do something. But the nursing homes, and this is a trend in nursing homes, they will talk to the spouse, not involve very many people at all. They don't like these elder law attorneys, even though we're here to help them too, really.
Yeah.
And they try to get him qualified for Medicaid. And then they said, well, he's not qualified yet. You owe us $10,000. And she said, I don't have that. And I said to her, okay, that's all right. Let's cut the bleeding. Let's get him out of here. He obviously qualifies for hospice. You have children. Let's see if they'll step up to the bat, and maybe you can have a little bit of extra services too. And that's what she did. And he went home, and he was home for, I don't know, more than 6 months. And she paid off that $10,000 very slowly, and that was okay.
Right.
But they just swooped down, and I get where they're coming from, because they've got to pay these bills. I've often said the one job I would never want would be to be a nursing home administrator, because you've got all these people looking at you. You've got to get this done, this done, this done. And from aides on up, anybody can make a mistake and you're liable for it. It's terrible. I wouldn't want that.
It's an awesome, hard responsibility for sure.
It really is.
I mean, particularly, coming out of COVID, where, people were forced into nursing homes, not allowed to leave nursing homes, couldn't get staff for nursing homes. I mean, it was a nightmare. We lived through that as well. My father-in-law was in the nursing home during COVID, and happened to be at a great nursing home.
That's good.
Like it was run by Jewish charities in Rockley, and he was blessed that he got into a good place, and it makes all the difference in the world.
All the difference, absolutely. Well, the other bad thing about COVID, and this is not in my book, but was the isolation that occurred with people who couldn't see their family members. A really good friend of ours, who was only in his early 70s, broke his femur. And then that often broken bones lead to other things.
Right.
So he had the broken femur. He went home, and he had money. I mean, we arranged for 24-hour care for him, and he was doing okay at home. But then he needed to get one of his heart valves replaced. And that happened to be just quickly. So off to the hospital he went, and then they were ready to discharge him. And we said, hey, we've got in-home care. He's set up. You don't have to worry about sending him to a nursing home. We want him to go home. And those doctors, I don't know what, and discharge planners bulldozed his wife and daughter and said, well, you just got to send him to a nursing home. And that was the worst thing. They couldn't go in and see him. He was confused. It was awful. We finally got it. They took him out finally against medical advice. We had our goods set up all over again. That was over the weekend. On Monday, Adult Protective Services came and said, well, we got a call to investigate this. Of course, they looked at it and they said, well, this is fine. We can't imagine anything was wrong. And so that was good. That was the end of that. Well, then a little while later, he got sick again, required hospitalization. And this time, when he was getting ready for discharge, back to the 24-hour care, he died in the hospital just before he discharged. Terrible, just terrible.
Yeah. And this is...
And everybody's got those stories about COVID.
Sure. Absolutely. And what's terrible about it is, the last 2.5, 3 years now have been rough on everybody. But for a lot of people, it was the last months, it was the last days, it was the last years of their life.
That's right.
And that's how they spent it, isolated from family and friends, a wave maybe at a window, a nurse who was afraid to go into the room.
And lack of touch. I mean, it was a horrible thing. I knew lots of people that died during COVID in nursing homes. And I really think isolation had a lot to do with it. Very sad. But
absolutely,
we're opening up again, so that's good, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I know your work has been in elder law. You worked as a paralegal for many years. Are you still doing that? You've written this book. Okay.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about your career and how people can get in touch if they want help.
Um, well, my email is in the book. My email address is Ms. Mary 00305. That's my birthday at gmail.com. I have a Facebook page called Aging in Place, Aging with Grace, and I have another Facebook community. It's called Mary's Caring Community. And I've got my phone number, which is in.
We don't have to give that out here, though,
No,
but I think the best first start for people is to get your book. It's called Aging in Place, Navigating the Maze of Long-Term Care.
Yes.
Now, if any of these stories that we talked about, Mary and I today, have shaken you up a little bit, that's a good thing. Because I was thinking you could plan at like maybe 65 or 70, start planning. She says start planning at 50, 55. That's when you need to purchase your long-term care insurance.
55 to 65 is what they're
55
saying.
55 to 65 is okay.
I was 50.
Okay. All right.
But John and I felt very strongly that if we were going to do Medicaid planning with people, we should be able to say confidently that we have long-term care insurance, and that's the optimum. But there's other things you can do. There are trusts that you can do and things, and some of them I think are fine, and others I don't know. But the important thing to know is there's a 5-year look back period for any gifts,
right?
And that's going to change. I think it's going to become longer and longer because nursing home expenditures are one of the main expenses of the Medicaid program,
right?
And it's not going to get any better.
But again, that only hurts the middle class because the poor have Medicaid, the rich can afford it, and the middle class get burdened. Unfortunately, that is the case.
But that's the way it is.
Yep. It is an amazing book. It's a step-by-step guide on how to navigate this awful maze of long-term care. One other thing I was going to say to you, Mary, I think it's a good idea to make these plans and make the decisions yourself and figure out what you want your lifestyle to be when you're older, as opposed to leaving to the kids who might want to preserve their inheritance.
Yes. And the other thing is, and that's very true, is to communicate with your loved ones and your children about what your wishes are. That's really tough. John had a care conference this week with a gentleman who's deaf, and he's having problems with swallowing now. And there are different code statuses. Like you've got full code is they do everything, including breaking your chest to keep you alive, all the way down to no code, which is they don't do anything. Many people use comfort care as a code, but he wants full code. He doesn't care, and it's like, are you sure? But and his family is very much advocating comfort care,
right?
But we'll see.
Yeah. These are all personal decisions we want to make ourselves and not leave it to others because it's a burden on others. The name of the book, once again, Aging in Place, Navigating the Maze of Long-Term Care. It's written by Mary Mashburn. She has her email address in the book as well, so you can contact her for some personalized advice as well. Mary, thank you so much for joining us here today.
You're welcome. Spotlight. It's so important. I just believe in all this so much. I really do. It's been my life's work, and I would do it all over again.
Well, you're great at it. This book you've put together is a perfect how-to manual for folks. And like I said, this is, when my parents passed, they passed early on. They passed in their late 70s and 80s. People are living to be 90, 100, 95.
Yes.
And which is wonderful.
It is.
You need to plan. You need to take care of, because most 95-year-olds aren't that agile. So they're going to need a little help. All right, Mary, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you so much.
And I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time on Spotlight.